Welcome to this explainer. Today we're diving into some pretty eye-opening data from the 2026 Global Peace Index, and we're going to look at it right alongside recent reporting on youth protests in South Asia. What we're trying to figure out is this wild, kind of terrifying collision happening in our world right now. Basically, you've got these decentralized, smartphone-wielding citizen movements running headfirst into the highly centralized, hyper-fast world of AI warfare.
Okay, let's talk about the stakes here because they are massive. 21.8 trillion US dollars. That is the global economic cost of violence in the year 2025 alone. Just to put that staggering number into perspective, that equates to 10.5% of the entire world's GDP. We are talking over $2,500 for every single person on the planet, just drained by conflict.
So to make sense of all this instability, we're going to break this down into 5 parts. First, the Great Fragmentation. Then, the Gen Z uprisings, followed by upheaval in South Asia, the geopolitical fallout, and finally, phones versus drones.
All right, part 1, the Great Fragmentation, a world in conflict. We're starting with the macro perspective here, a major shift away from that rapid globalization we were all seeing back in the 1990s.
Looking at the 2026 Global Peace Index, you really see a world that is fracturing. Actually, a staggering 119 countries are less peaceful today than they were back in 2008. We're witnessing a complete structural transformation in the international system, and a lot of this is driven by heightened military spending and, well, the shrinking role of multilateral institutions. The harsh reality is that the historical mechanisms we've relied on for ending wars, they're simply failing right now, and the human cost is absolutely massive. I mean, look at this data. We've seen a 6-fold increase in internal conflict deaths since 2008, hitting over 181,000 last year alone. On top of that, we're seeing nearly double the number of countries involved in external conflicts and a heartbreaking 117 million forcibly displaced people around the globe.
Moving to part 2, the Gen Z uprisings, digital pushback. Now we're going to zoom in a bit to see exactly how the most digitally connected generation in human history is responding to all this systemic global fragmentation.
It's fascinating because across totally different continents, places like Kenya, Peru, Bulgaria, we're seeing this shared, highly effective blueprint for protest. These Gen Z movements are decentralized, they're intentionally leaderless, they mobilize at just lightning speed using smartphones, memes, digital networks, you name it. And they're usually triggered by one very specific moral indignation, like a tax hike or an unfair pension reform. But here's the catch, right? While they are incredibly effective at disrupting governments and forcing really rapid concessions, they frequently struggle with what comes next. It's tough to translate that horizontal, viral disruption into stable, hierarchical institutional governance.
This brings us to part 3, upheaval in South Asia, the demographic collision. You see, this global wave has intensely impacted South Asia, which is a region where a massive demographic divide is currently boiling over.
The contrast here is just stark. Consider this. India is home to 600 million youth. That is literally the largest youth cohort in human history. Yet the average age of an Indian member of parliament is 56. So you've got this rapidly expanding, highly connected, digitally native youth population squaring off against an aging political elite that's long monopolized legislative power and frankly is increasingly out of touch with the digital generation. And over just the last 4 years, this demographic pressure cooker has fundamentally shaken established governments across the entire South Asian subcontinent. Let's trace this domino effect. 2022, Sri Lanka's government is toppled. 2024, student quota protests in Bangladesh oust a prime minister who had been in power for 15 years. Then in 2025, a social media ban in Nepal sparks a Gen Z overthrow in a matter of days. And in 2026, the youth movement in India forces the resignation of the national education minister.
So what actually triggered that recent explosion in India? Well, it was a very specific remark. The Chief Justice used the words cockroaches and parasites to describe unemployed youth and activists. But rather than demoralizing the students, this dehumanizing language completely backfired. It ignited massive moral indignation and actually birthed a giant satirical movement calling themselves the Cockroach Janta Party, or CJP. They essentially took an insult and turned it into this viral badge of honor.
But the CJP didn't stop at satire. The movement quickly coalesced around some very tangible, deeply personal grievances. It wasn't just about a quote anymore. It was about systemic education failures. We're talking paper leaks in the crucial NEET medical entrance exams, huge irregularities in the national CBSE marking system, soaring youth unemployment, and a truly heartbreaking epidemic of 13,000 student suicides every single year due to immense academic pressure. When the state responded with police crackdowns and the forced hospitalization of activist Sonam Wangchuk, the CJP stepped up. They acted impartially as this powerful megaphone for marginalized youth, just demanding basic accountability.
Now, into part 4, the geopolitical fallout, the case of Bangladesh. Because obviously, these domestic youth uprisings don't just happen in a vacuum. They create massive geopolitical ripples right across borders.
This is really evident when we look at the recent ousting of Bangladesh's Prime Minister, Sheikh Hasina. Looking at the strategic shifts, India had invested heavily in Hasina's government for over a decade. They built connectivity infrastructure, signed billion-dollar power deals, relied on her to secure India's eastern borders against rebel groups, the whole shebang. But then, Hasina cracks down on student protests, leading to nearly 300 deaths. The resulting youth uprising forces her to literally flee by military helicopter to New Delhi. So now, her sudden departure and this new interim government have created a profound strategic vulnerability and a potential massive loss of influence for the Indian government in a totally vital neighboring country.
All right, bringing us to part 5, phones versus drones, the future of conflict. Zooming back out to the macro level, we absolutely have to contrast these horizontal, smartphone-wielding citizen movements with another defining trend of our era.
And that trend is how state militaries are rapidly centralizing power and totally changing the face of conflict through artificial intelligence. Because while citizens are out there using digital networks to demand transparency and democratic accountability, state actors are moving in the exact opposite direction. They're utilizing these highly concentrated, opaque AI systems to execute conflicts with terrifying machine-driven speed.
We are witnessing an incredible technological leap here. Think about it. In the 1990s, using conventional cruise missiles, it took roughly a full day to identify a target and execute a strike. Today, utilizing AI autonomous selection systems in places like Ukraine and Iran, that entire targeting process has collapsed from 24 hours down to as little as 5 seconds. 5 seconds.
And the weapons delivering these strikes are proliferating way faster than any government can regulate them. The Global Peace Index reports a 115-fold increase in recorded drone strike events between 2018 and 2025. And this isn't just a few global superpowers doing this. 565 different armed groups utilized drone technology during that period. It's completely reshaping the battlefield.
We can clearly see the real-world implications of this speed by looking at the data on the use of AI in Gaza. The Israeli Defense Forces deployed an algorithmic targeting system known as Lavender, which flagged 37,000 Palestinians as suspected militants. Now, despite the system having a known 10% error rate, the sheer speed of modern warfare meant that human review of these AI-generated targets was dangerously compressed. We're talking roughly 20 seconds of human review per strike. Neutrally looking at the data, this demonstrates a massive erosion of meaningful human oversight in lethal decision-making.
So when we put all of this together, we are witnessing a definitive clash of eras. On one side, you have these Gen Z movements, decentralized, demanding transparency, completely driven by digital connection and profound human indignation. On the exact opposite side, you have modern state militaries, increasingly centralized, highly opaque, driven by automated AI targeting operating at machine speed. It's essentially the ultimate battle between horizontal, human-driven democratic rights and the vertical, algorithm-driven expansion of military power.
As we step back and look at these converging macro trends from the 2026 Global Peace Index, we really have to ask ourselves, which force is ultimately going to define our global future? Can these passionate, decentralized youth movements actually translate their massive disruptions into stable, lasting democratic peace? Or will the rapid centralization of emerging AI technologies allow states to further entrench this era of profound geopolitical fragmentation? It is literally the defining question of our time, and honestly, the answer is going to shape the stability of our world for decades to come. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I encourage you to keep questioning the world around you.